In the 1950s to 1970s, being gay was considered a stain powerful enough to erase the career of any major star. To protect profits, the studios turned the lives of 15 national father figures into cold-blooded performances built on deception. One sitcom father had to swallow his tears and deliver jokes on television the very moment his same-sex partner had just died in a tragic accident. What followed was a long stretch of torment, self-destruction, and inner collapse, until his final breath, all for the hope of one day being reunited with the man he had loved so deeply. Meanwhile, an upright lawyer known for exposing lies on screen secretly fabricated fake graves for a wife and children who had never existed simply to protect the truth about his real sexuality for half a century. Even more heartbreaking was the man labeled the happiest father in America, who carried to his last breath the yearning to live authentically and the burden of a devastating disease into a cold grave, all to preserve a prefabricated family blueprint imposed by the system. So who were the 15 iconic fathers who traded blood and tears to conceal their same-sex lives? Let us open the first file. Paul Lynde, the tragedy of a sitcom. Dad forced to use laughter as a human shield for a forbidden same-sex love. For millions of American families in the 1970s, Paul Lynde was a dazzling king of comedy. But behind the studio lights, he was the most emblematic victim of the Hollywood machine, wrung dry for laughs to entertain the public, yet forbidden to grieve for the same-sex partner who had just died in a horrific tragedy. The television industry's exploitation began with how it profited from his very sexual orientation. America loved Paul Lynde as the center square on Hollywood squares. Audiences went wild for his effeminate flair and the sexually loaded, innuendo-soaked jokes he delivered. Producers squeezed every last drop out of this coded identity. Yet the studio's hypocritical line was drawn with brutal cruelty. Lynde was allowed to hint, but he was never under any circumstances allowed to admit that he was gay. That stranglehold reached an absurd peak in 1972. ABC forced him into sweaters and cast him as a traditional straight father, a suburban husband in the sitcom The Paul Lynde Show. Forcing a gay icon into the national dad mold made the show painfully awkward, and it collapsed in disastrous failure after just one season. He was officially locked inside a transparent glass closet, a place where the audience could see through to who he was, but the system forbade him from living the truth. So, why would a sharp genius like Lynde bow his head and accept this imprisonment? The answer lies in a blood-soaked incident that happened on the night of January 10, 1965. At a hotel in San Francisco, James Bing Davidson, Lynde's secret life partner, slipped and fell from an 8th-floor window to his death after a drunken night of partying. Police ruled it an accident, but to Lynde that fall became a suspended death sentence hanging over his head. Television in the 1960s had no space for the truth. Lynde understood perfectly. It would take only one newspaper article confirming that the young man whose body was shattered on the ground had been his lover for every contract to be torn up and for him to be immediately thrown onto the blacklist. The paranoia of being exposed forced Lynde to swallow his tears, plaster on makeup, and keep performing comedy. But being forced to bury the death of the man he loved destroyed his psyche. Once he stepped away from the camera, Lynde poured all that repression into wild, debauched parties filled with young men in Beverly Hills. In the memoir Backstage with the Original Hollywood Square, published in 2002, host Peter Marshall revealed the moment the cameras shut off, Lynde reached for brutal amounts of alcohol and transformed into a ruthless alcoholic. That self-loathing made him vicious, using insults to attack the very producers who had locked him in darkness, while also driving friends away with his own hands. Actress Florence Henderson once sorrowfully called her colleague a tortured soul. On January 10, 1982, exactly 17 years after his partner's death, Paul Lynde died of a myocardial infarction at the age of 55. His body was found in complete solitude. Paul Lynde taught all of America how to laugh, but the Hollywood system forced him to take the tear-soaked secret of who he truly was down into the grave. Robert Reed. The National Dad and the Same-Sex Love Hollywood Condemned. In 1992, America mourned the death of Robert Reed at the age of 59. But the moment the death certificate was released, a chilling silence fell over Hollywood. Alongside the cause, the press had reported earlier the medical file recorded a shocking detail. HIV was a contributing factor in his death. That detail smashed the wall of concealment built over decades, exposing a hidden life that America's most proper father had been forced to lock away in darkness. Throughout the 1970s, Robert Reed was Mike Brady, the calm, happy symbol of the American father in the Brady Bunch. Millions of viewers worshipped his household, never knowing that the smooth surface hid a shattered soul. On the outside, Reed blamed the overly sweet, naive scripts that made him repeatedly explode and argue on set. But his co-star Florence Henderson saw through to the truth. She sorrowfully called him an imprisoned soul. That anger was, in reality, the scream of a man suffocating as he was forced to wear a fake masculine ideal every day. The truth was that even during the peak years when he played a model husband on television, Robert Reed was quietly living with a male life partner. While the character Mike Brady he portrayed in the Brady Bunch smiled and taught his children about honesty, the real Robert Reed had to lie to the entire world. He plunged into the underground world of Los Angeles, hiding in discreet nightclubs and bars, the only places where he was permitted to live, according to his sexual orientation. Everyone on set knew about this same-sex relationship, but all of them obeyed the studio's brutal law of silence. The audience had no idea that after filming scenes of hugging and kissing his on-screen wife, Reed hurried off set, dodging photographers to go home where another man was waiting for him. A love that was real and present, yet stamped by the entertainment industry as against moral norms and forbidden to ever be named. The suffocating pressure of maintaining that cover destroyed Reed. He once tried to fit in by entering a short-lived marriage with a woman in the 1950s and having a daughter, but that forced marriage quickly ended in silence. For the rest of his life, he became a prisoner of the image he had created. He could not publicly hold the hand of the person he loved, could not share personal happiness, and lived breathing in fear that his career would be ruined if the secret leaked. Even as he took his final breaths in a hospital bed carrying the disease of the era inside him, Reed still had to take that secret with him. He spent his entire life teaching America how to be a sincere father, yet tragically he was never allowed to live honestly in his own love. Paul Newman. The Monument of the Faithful Husband and the shocking same-sex romance file. Why should I go out for a hamburger when I already have steak at home? For half a century, all of America obediently believed this famous line. Paul Newman and his wife Joanne Woodward built a 50-year marriage empire, becoming the ultimate standard of the American family. The media even handed him the Unzippered Award, a prize reserved for the only male star in Hollywood who supposedly never strayed. In 2009, biographer Darwin Porter dropped a bomb on Newman's legacy with the sensational book, Paul Newman, the Man Behind the Baby Blues. Porter claimed a shocking truth. America's most faithful heartthrob was in fact bisexual, and he had an entirely different romantic menu behind the camera. The book dragged into the light alleged fiery same-sex affairs between Newman and the era's most aggressively masculine icons. First was the radiant ghost, James Dean. Porter's file described long nights in underground circles where the two allegedly shared erotic passion far beyond the boundaries of friendship after the East of Eden screen tests. Newman's magnetism was also said to reach Marlon Brando, who had once openly admitted in the press to sleeping with men. The two were said to have had a complex physical relationship, torn and entangled behind closed hotel doors. The list of lovers was said to continue with famous names like Sal Mineo and Anthony Perkins. When he shed the suit of a model husband, Newman was portrayed as a man who craved fleshly adventures with men who carried a rebellious aura. Yet the cruelest element was Hollywood's massive cover-up machine. Whenever a hotel employee or a paparazzo seemed ready to whisper about seeing Newman leave a room with a male star, the risk management team's phone would ring in the middle of the night. By the next morning, not a single scandalous line appeared in the newspapers. Instead, the PR machine smothered the fire by releasing crisp photos of Newman smiling as he grilled in the backyard with his wife, or strolling peacefully along a beach. He was trapped inside the family brand he had built, unable to confirm it, and never quite bothering to deny it either. People often saw him sinking into decades of heavy drinking with a beer can in hand, an anesthetic that many believed was used to soothe the suffocation of having to lock away half of his sexual identity. In 2008, Paul Newman carried the secret of same-sex kisses down into a dark grave. He left America a perfect blueprint of the faithful husband, yet he himself had to live breathless inside that fabricated blueprint for his entire life. Raymond Burr, using an illusionary funeral as a cover for a half-life same-sex love. The most perfect script for hiding a secret is not silence, but crafting a fabricated tragedy with your own hands. This sentence feels like the barest sketch of Raymond Burr's life. On screen, he embodied absolute justice through the legendary Perry Mason, or the authoritative detective Robert Ironside, a righteous man who specialized in exposing lies. Yet bitterly ironic, the man who hunted truth on film became the author of the most horrifying false declaration performance in Hollywood history, all to protect his forbidden gay world. At the height of his fame, when the press began to point curious questions at why a charismatic, successful man like Burr never publicly dated women, the studio's PR machine immediately planted a bomb to crush every suspicion about his sexuality. Rather than letting Burr face the public's tongues, they decided to build him a grave. The studio released a tear-soaked biography. Raymond Burr had once had a beloved wife and a child, but both had died tragically in a plane crash. The public wept for the faithful widower, and the media immediately fell silent because no one dared reopen the supposed wound of a man who had lost his whole family. The lie was so cold-blooded that the studio and Burr himself even fabricated fake photographs to fully legitimize the ghosts of people who had never existed in this world. While all of America mourned that fabricated life story, in reality, Raymond Burr was quietly sharing his life with actor Robert Benavides. For more than 3 decades, they lived together behind closed gates, traveled the world side by side, and built a flourishing orchid business empire. His large frame and the authority of the lawyer and police roles he played became a perfect steel armor, blocking prying eyes and keeping their small space of same-sex love safe. But Hollywood's dignity-crushing machine did not spare him, even when the death bell rang. In 1993, when Raymond Burr breathed his last, the obituaries sent around the world mentioned Robert Benavides, the man who had shared Burr's bed and life for more than 30 years, only with a cold, emotionless, label business partner. It was a final slap from the era onto a steadfast love that lasted longer than most legal marriages in the film capital. Raymond Burr spent a lifetime defending justice before the jury of the screen, yet he never had the chance to stand before the world and name truthfully the man he loved most. Dick Sargent, the invisibility cloak of the national husband. Viewers who watched Entertainment Tonight in the early 1990s surely still remember the shock named Dick Sargent. On October 11, 1991, the actor known as the national husband smashed his own image and declared loudly he loved men. But even more surprising was that all of Hollywood supported him, because he was trying to save young lives being pushed to the edge. That explosion was in truth the last drop after half a life of being suffocated. Back in the 1970s, Sargent became famous as Darren Stevens in the sitcom Bewitched. He was the steady shoulder, the pillar protecting a wife with magic. But to keep that straight man role in a Hollywood deeply hostile to gay people, he paid a heavy price. Studio executives understood the brutal truth. It would take only one leaked photo of Sargent walking out of a gay nightclub for his career to be instantly executed, and for the show to collapse. So his management company slipped a sentence around his neck called the invisibility strategy. The moment the director called cut, that perfect husband had to evaporate from the world. He was forced to decline every party invitation, cut off social contact, and lock himself behind closed doors so that no one could suspect his real sexuality. That ruthless confinement might have followed him to the grave, if he had not witnessed a tragedy in the early 1990s when the rate of suicide among gay teenagers soared, while indifferent politicians vetoed bills meant to protect them. The rage shattered Sargent's limits. Carrying prostate cancer in his body, he decided to rip off the invisibility cloak. On television, he called himself a late model, using what remained of his battered fame as a shield for desperate children. When Sargent appeared on air with his emaciated body, malicious gossip claimed he was wasting away from the stigmatized epidemic disease. Instead of stepping back, he stared straight into the camera and delivered a hard blow. "I'm HIV negative, but even if I had it, I would still be proud to live the rest of my life truthfully." Contrary to Hollywood's familiar rejection, his courage created a real miracle. In 1992, Elizabeth Montgomery, his magic wife on screen, proudly linked arms with him to lead the Pride Parade in Los Angeles. It became the most beautiful image carrying the message that living true to yourself is the greatest gift you can give yourself. And more than that, he used his own career to save young souls before he closed his eyes forever. Will Geer and the same-sex love that lit the fire for the civil rights movement. Millions of American families in the 1970s were once enamored with Grandpa Walton, the ultimate symbol of traditional family values. But if conservative viewers back then had known whom this silver-haired man once held in his arms in his youth, the network would likely have pulled the plug immediately. Decades before becoming the nation's grandpa, Will Geer had already been a proud rebel. In 1934, he plunged into a fiery love affair with Harry Hay and personally led his partner into the path of social activism. Fueled by that flame, Hay went on to found the Mattachine Society, America's first civil rights organization for gay people. While stars like Dick Sargent or Paul Lynde trembled inside a glass closet, Geer and his male partner stood proudly side by side at protests. Geer's marriage was also a slap in the face of rigid dogma. Although he married actress Herta Ware and had a child, it was an open marriage. His wife fully understood and accepted that her husband loved men. In Geer's home, sexual orientation was never treated as a shameful secret that had to be silenced. When the American political machine launched purges in the 1950s targeting gay people as well, Geer was thrown onto the blacklist, stripped of his entire career. Instead of kneeling and begging for mercy, he bought a piece of land in Los Angeles and built an outdoor theater to shelter the souls Hollywood had cast out. The ultimate irony arrived in the final chapter of his life. The same Hollywood machine that once drove him away eventually rolled out the red carpet and paid him a fortune to play a model's straight grandfather. Will Geer closed his eyes for the last time in 1978. He played a magnificent hand using the conservative system's own money to nourish a free, rebellious spirit until his final breath. Marlon Brando. When a monument of masculinity personally toppled Hollywood's script. Like many men, I too have had same-sex experiences, and I am not ashamed of it. This explosive statement did not come from some unknown artist. It came from the man hailed as America's most wild masculine icon of the 1970s. While other national dads lived in terror that their careers would collapse if their true sexuality were exposed, Marlon Brando chose to throw the truth straight into the public's face in an interview in 1976. But look at Hollywood's hypocrisy. Instead of acknowledging it, the media and studios of that era chose to pretend they didn't hear. They were so terrified of losing profits from his rugged, wandering man image on screen that they deliberately brushed aside his confession, treating it as nothing more than a whimsical moment from an eccentric genius. Brando's resistance to the ideal straight man script was not only in words but also in one haunting act. For 30 years, he kept the ashes of his close friend actor Wally Cox right in his bedroom. Brando's final wish was not a glittering tribute, but a request that his own ashes be mixed with that male friend's so they would never be separated. That is the ultimate bitter truth in this film capital. When you suffer and hide, they hunt you to the edge. But when you stand tall and throw the truth in their face, they cowardly cover their eyes and ears, because an honest confession will never be as profitable as a perfectly crafted lie. Rock Hudson, the king of the screen and the contract of selling his soul to the devil. Are you gay? Yes, that's the truth. This was Rock Hudson's coerced confession in a blackmail recording a weapon capable of destroying in an instant the career of the man hailed as the king of perfect husbands. Behind his 1.93-meter frame and his money-making smile, he was in truth an industrial product molded by Hollywood from his name to his private life for profit. Rock's tragedy was not only that he had to marry his secretary Phyllis Gates as a cover to silence the public, but also that he had to suffocate truths every single day. While the public celebrated his wedding of the century, Rock lived in absolute terror in real life. His true partner, Lee Garlington, later recalled that throughout their 3 passionate years, Rock always had to slip out of the house at 6 in the morning, letting the car roll downhill without daring to press the gas, afraid the neighbors would hear. Even when they attended red carpet events together, each of them had to bring along a fake girlfriend to perform the straight man play for the entire world. Hollywood's cruelty turned Rock Hudson's life into a long chain of deception. He taught his partner how to shave in a quiet, empty kitchen, and then immediately had to put on a suit and kiss a loveless wife in front of cameras. The final slap that tore the illusion apart was his death from AIDS in 1985. Hollywood squeezed Rock's beauty dry in exchange for million-dollar contracts and then left him to die in loneliness and humiliation when the truth no longer generated profit. At the end of his life in his memoir, he finally dared to call a former partner his true love. A belated confession after 30 years of living as a parasite inside his own fame. Cary Grant trading same-sex love for 5 marriage fronts. Audiences saw Cary Grant as the ultimate measure of elegance, the dream lover of every American woman. But power on screen could not save him from utter helplessness behind the scenes. The most unforgettable love of this charming gentleman was not for any woman, but for the rugged actor, Randolph Scott. The 2 screen icons spent 12 years living together unfiltered and intimate in what was known as a bachelor mansion. The press tried to gloss it over by calling them roommates, but photographs of them wearing aprons to make breakfast joking by the pool with love-struck eyes betrayed that lie. That freedom terrified the Paramount bosses. To protect the money-making straight image, the studio issued a cold-blooded ultimatum: smash this home and marry a woman immediately, or your career would be ended. Desperate and powerless before the machine, Grant clenched his teeth and personally slammed shut the only true door to happiness in his life. To survive in Hollywood, he obediently followed the script one by one, turning 5 innocent women into fronts, shielding his real sexuality. Each time he wore the groom's suit and smiled for the cameras, Grant pulled yet another person into the tragedy of deception. Those wives walked proudly down the aisle, never knowing that no matter how beautiful they were or how much they sacrificed, they could never fill the void left by that man. Audiences saw Grant change wives like changing shirts, but behind that Playboy image was the brutal cost of a man forced to lie beside 5 stunning roses, while his heart slowly died to the shadow of the lover from years ago. Richard Chamberlain and the sentence of imprisonment in adoration. As one of Hollywood's most romantic heartthrobs, Richard Chamberlain once lived in a room flooded with tens of thousands of love letters from female fans. Yet the harsh truth was that what this charming man longed for was people of the same sex. To him, each fragrant letter was not a dream, but a cold brick building, a barless prison that confined his life for 70 years. The evidence that shattered every mask came in 1989 when the French magazine Nu Deux publicly exposed his true sexuality to the entire world. But instead of admitting it and gaining freedom, Chamberlain chose a painful silence to protect his career. Not until 2003, in his autobiography, Shattered Love, did he dare to recall with a shiver, "I had to live in absolute terror that if people knew I was gay, my whole world would blow up." Hollywood's cruelty lies here. It turns the public's love into a rope that tightens around a star's throat. To protect the national son-in-law image, Chamberlain was forced to rehearse mechanical answers about an imaginary future wife whenever reporters questioned him. He even had to hide a same-sex relationship that lasted more than 30 years with Martin Rabbit under a bland label business partner. Even in the most private spaces, they still had to keep their distance out of fear of lurking paparazzi. Richard Chamberlain traded away his entire youth to play straight for the world, and only when he reached 70 did he finally, for the first time, truly get to live for himself. Randolph Scott. The collapse of the rugged drifter hero at the Bachelor Mansion. If on screen, Randolph Scott was the symbol of tough, dust and wind Western grit, then in real life, his story carried a softer, lovesick kind of pain. American audiences idolized him as a model dad, tough, firm, and straight shooting. Yet the biggest secret of his life was tied to actor Cary Grant. For 12 years, the two of them built a hidden home called the Bachelor Mansion, the only place where they could take off the armor of A-list stars and live truthfully as themselves. Their powerlessness became obvious when studio bosses saw leaked photographs of them caring for each other with unmistakable tenderness. In Hollywood at the time, a national father figure who loved men meant the collapse of a profit empire. The studio used its power to split the couple apart, forcing Scott to leave the man he loved most and pushing him into whirlwind marriages simply to calm public opinion. Randolph Scott spent his entire life defending what was right on film. Yet he was completely powerless to defend the truest love of his own life. He had to live the rest of his years in regret, hiding his loneliness behind a fabricated shell of masculinity that the entertainment industry had precast for him. Guy Madison, a staged marriage script, and the darkness of a cover wife. Guy Madison embodied traditional American family values of the 1950s. With an upright face and a heroic presence, he was the husband and father every family trusted. Yet behind the camera, his life was a chess piece controlled by talent manager Henry Wilson. To crush suspicions that Madison loved men, a ruthless marriage script was written forcing him to marry the young actress Gail Russell. This was not just concealment, it was a tragic trade. Gail Russell walked into the wedding aisle with a dreamy heart, only to wither in the coldness of a husband consumed with protecting his reputation and his real identity. While Madison strained to play the perfect husband in public to protect his livelihood behind the scenes, his wife slipped deeper into alcohol to forget the pain of being turned into a cheap cover. The loneliness inside her own home dragged them both into the pit of depression. Guy Madison kept the glow of a national dad, but the price was the shattering of an innocent life and a lifetime trapped in deception, where family warmth existed only when the stage lights turned on. Jim Nabors, a national smile, besieged by extreme control. American audiences loved Jim Nabors through his role as Gomer Pyle, the embodiment of innocence, naivety, and gentleness. He was seen as the representative son and father of America's working-class people. Yet behind that goofy laugh was a man forced to live in a constant state of red alert every day. Nabors' helplessness was laid bare when the studio enforced an extreme and ruthless policy of policing his private identity. Because of a rumor that he was secretly close to Rock Hudson, the bosses issued an absolute ban. Nabors was never allowed to appear with Rock or contact Rock ever again. To keep that money-making smile on television, he was forced to cut off with his own hands the most sacred bonds of his life. Jim Nabors lived his whole life in the cheers of millions, yet he left this world in silence because he could not once publicly hold the hand of the partner who shared his life. That national smile was in truth covered by Hollywood, with the pain of repression turning his backstage life into a long chain of lonely days where he had to choke down his true self to maintain the image of a spotless, good boy. Charles Laughton. The torment behind the mask of an authoritarian patriarch. Unlike flashy leading men, Charles Laughton was a master of playing fathers, patriarchs, and clan leaders with imposing authority and steel-hard morality. He represented the old-school standard of masculinity, tough, dignified, and austere. But when the stage lights went out, that patriarch fell apart inside a slow-burning inner torment. As a man who loved men, but was forced to live his entire life in a lavender marriage. Lawton carried a deep sense of guilt, shaped by the harsh social standards of the time. The most painful proof was how often he would hide in the dressing room and burst into uncontrollable sobs because of the brutal conflict within himself. A man who had to perform the role of the model straight man in exchange for fame and an Oscar. Studio pressure and social prejudice pushed him into long-term depression. He could transform brilliantly into any character, but the straight man role in real life exhausted him. Charles Lawton is a painful testament to how Hollywood can praise your talent to the skies while also tightening your soul inside a lying performance with no way out, leaving your final years drowned in self-disgust and overwhelming loneliness. Tony Randall, the most satirical con in Hollywood history. America was fooled in the most painful way when the man they believed was the most manly was the one who loved men, while the guy mocked as the most effeminate was 100% straight. If you place the two icons from Pillow Talk side by side, audiences can see a ridiculous contrast. Rock Hudson broad-shouldered enough to dominate the frame, and Tony Randall with mannerisms so polished and fussy that he was labeled a closet type. But the truth was, a slap in the face of prejudice, while Rock Hudson lived in absolute terror because of his real identity, Tony Randall. The man the entire country suspected was actually one of the most faithful husbands of all. This was the height of studio hypocrisy. They were willing to suppress, hide, and destroy the careers of actors who truly loved men. Yet on the other hand, they happily paid millions of dollars for Tony Randall to make audiences laugh by performing traits associated with the LGBTQ+ community. Hollywood brutally trampled the souls of people like Rock Hudson, yet squeezed every last drop out of their polished image through Randall for two words: profit. Audiences saw Randall's passion for opera and his gentle manner and automatically shoved him into a biased glass closet. Yet when the cameras stopped rolling, Randall went home to the wife who had stood by him for more than half a century. Even at 75, he shocked the public again by marrying a wife 50 years younger and having 2 more children. His wife explained he was so confident in his masculinity that he never once cared what the world thought. That confidence helped Randall do what no one dared, taking the first leading role of a same-sex male character on national television. He did not love men, but he used the privilege of a truly straight man as a shield to take the bullets for those who had no voice. Tony Randall exposed a bitter irony in Hollywood. Sometimes you have to be straight to have enough power to protect fairness for those who are bent and buried in the shadows. The 15 lives we have just walked through are not only secret love stories, but a blunt indictment of the cruelty of Hollywood's golden age. Behind picture-perfect homes were tortured souls forced to trade away the right to love, and the longing to live as themselves just to keep a perfect illusion alive for the public. In the film, capital, real same-sex love became the enemy of profit. The studios were willing to turn them into golden geese, lock them inside the glass closet of lies, and then abandon them to drift away in loneliness and the coldness of their era. They carried their same-sex kisses and their silent tears down into the grave. Now, as the velvet curtain closes, we remember them not as liars, but as gifted artists who spent their entire lives performing the harshest role of all the national dad. I hope these secrets help you understand the price of freedom those legends never truly had. If you feel for their pain, please hit like and subscribe so you do not miss the next shocking hidden corners.